I learned that song like 2 days before I performed it live. Oh my gosh, and I about puked every time I performed on the show. It was just...
Before the world ever heard her name, Darci Lynne Farmer was just a soft-spoken girl from Oklahoma with a voice that stunned her family, but only behind closed doors. At home, her singing was angelic, pure, even powerful. But the moment anyone else listened, something inside her would freeze. Teachers saw her talent. Friends encouraged her. Yet Darci simply couldn't bring herself to sing in front of a crowd. Her voice, once confident in solitude, would vanish under the weight of expectation. This wasn't just stage fright. It was a paralyzing fear that locked her away from what she loved most. Her mother, Misty, enrolled her in school plays and community talent shows, hoping exposure would help. But again and again, Darci would back out at the last minute, in tears, trembling, unable to speak, let alone perform. At one point, the family considered giving up. Maybe she's just not meant for the stage, they whispered among themselves, unsure how to help a child whose dream was held hostage by anxiety. Even her church choir performances became a gamble. Some days she'd sing a few lines, other days she'd crumble before the first note. No one doubted her potential, but everyone began to fear she'd never conquer the wall between her and the spotlight. It wasn't rebellion, it wasn't laziness. It was raw, unfiltered fear, so intense it nearly silenced her future. This wasn't a child who lacked ambition. This was a girl whose biggest enemy lived inside her own mind. While others her age chased fame with confidence, Darci was hiding behind locked doors, mouthing lyrics into a mirror, wondering why her body betrayed her whenever she tried to share her gift. And if something didn't change soon, that voice the world would one day cheer for might have been lost forever. But just when it seemed like fear had won, something unexpected entered her life. And it didn't come in the form of a microphone. It was a strange solution to an invisible problem, one that even Darci's parents didn't fully understand at first. When her mother introduced her to a local ventriloquism coach named Larissa Bonaquisti, it wasn't with dreams of fame or viral stardom. It was desperation. Darci's voice was trapped by fear, but her creativity was bursting at the seams. So when a friend suggested that perhaps a puppet could act as a buffer between Darci and the spotlight, it sounded almost ridiculous. But then something clicked. The moment she slipped her hand inside that first puppet, Katie the cow, it was as if a switch had been flipped. Suddenly, she could speak. She could sing, not as Darci, but through the character. The puppet gave her permission to hide in plain sight, and with that safety net, her talent finally emerged. Her shyness didn't vanish, but it was masked, literally, by felt foam and a painted smile. Audiences didn't see a frightened little girl. They saw a performer, bold and fearless. With each local talent show, her confidence grew. But what people didn't see was what happened after the curtain fell. Darci would often cry backstage, overwhelmed by the attention she wasn't yet emotionally equipped to handle. Her anxiety didn't disappear, it simply waited behind the applause. But still, she kept going. She trained for hours, practiced voices in her bedroom, and studied old ventriloquism tapes with an obsession few children her age could maintain. Every movement was meticulous, every joke calculated, every note rehearsed with precision. She began entering pageants and regional competitions, not to win, but to survive the fear. And slowly, without even realizing it, Darci was building a weapon against the very thing that once crippled her: stage presence. The puppet wasn't just a character. It was a shield, a lifeline, a tool that allowed Darci to finally become what she was always meant to be: a storyteller, a vocalist, a performer. But even as she collected trophies and headlines in Oklahoma, one terrifying question remained unanswered. Could she hold it together when the stakes were higher than she'd ever imagined? By the time Darci Lynne was invited to audition for America's Got Talent, she wasn't just another hopeful. She was already being whispered about in underground talent circles as the puppet girl from Oklahoma who could sing like a pro. But what the cameras never captured, and what few fans ever knew, was that her path to that golden stage was nearly derailed before it even began. Unlike most contestants who line up in cattle call auditions, Darci had been quietly scouted. Talent bookers had caught wind of her through YouTube clips and talent pageants, and they reached out directly. But instead of excitement, Darci froze. The moment the offer arrived, her old fears came rushing back with a vengeance. She reportedly told her mother, "I can't do it. I'm not ready." The pressure of a national audience, of being watched by millions, ignited the same storm of self-doubt that had once kept her silent in grade school talent shows. According to family accounts, Darci went days without speaking about the audition. At one point, her parents were prepared to cancel the entire trip to Los Angeles, not because they doubted her skill, but because they feared what the pressure might do to her mental health. Even after arriving at the venue, she was distant, withdrawn, refusing to eat breakfast, barely making eye contact. Her mother later admitted in interviews that we didn't know if she'd go through with it until she actually walked on stage. Backstage, Darci sat in a corner with Petunia in her lap, silently mouthing lines, her lips trembling. One witness described the moment as eerily calm, like she was bracing for something terrible. No production drama, no diva attitude, just a scared little girl staring at a curtain she wasn't sure she could walk through. It was only after a quiet conversation with her vocal coach, followed by a deep breathing exercise led by her older brother, that Darci finally stood up. And when the stage manager called her name, the silence broke, not in a scream, not in panic, but in the voice of a rabbit puppet named Petunia, singing Summertime, with a power that sent shockwaves through the room. But what the judges didn't see, what no one saw, was how close she came to turning around and walking away forever. Long before the lights of AGT lit up her face, Darci Lynne was being quietly molded by voices most fans never heard and names that rarely made headlines. While her family stood by her through every trembling step, it was a trio of unexpected mentors who stepped in and changed the trajectory of her life. First came Larissa Bonaquisti, a former Miss Louisiana, daughter of a professional ventriloquist, and herself a young pageant performer who instantly recognized the war Darci was waging internally. She didn't just teach Darci technique. She taught her how to breathe through panic, how to channel fear into character, how to let the puppet carry the weight of expectation. Then there was Darci's vocal therapist, who approached her not as a star in the making, but as a fragile child needing shelter. Their sessions didn't focus on range or projection. They focused on resilience, affirmations, emotional check-ins, visualization. Darci was being trained not just for performance, but for psychological survival. And finally, there was the quiet influence of Miss Oklahoma herself, a family friend who once confided to Darci that the crown means nothing if you don't know who you are without it. That line stuck. These women didn't push Darci toward fame. They pulled her away from fear. They never promised her the world. They helped her build one she could survive in. In private sessions and local events, Darci learned to step onto small stages with a trembling smile and leave them with a standing ovation. Her mother later admitted, "We never thought she'd go this far. We were just hoping she'd find her confidence." And confidence didn't come from applause. It came from being believed in when she was still too afraid to believe in herself. Without these hidden hands guiding her, nurturing her spirit while others praised her talent, Darci might never have stood under that AGT spotlight. She wasn't just coached, she was protected, mentored, reminded that success wasn't about perfection, it was about courage. But just as she started gaining strength, the past came back to haunt her in the form of a quiet, mysterious disappearance no one could explain. Before the thunderous applause of America's Got Talent, Darci Lynne had already dipped her toes into the spotlight, but just as quickly, she disappeared. Most fans don't know this, but Darci was once part of a regional musical theater program affiliated with the Kids Incorporated Performance Network, a respected but low-key ensemble of young talent known across Oklahoma. She wasn't just a participant. She was a standout, regularly receiving praise for her stage presence and musical instincts. But then, without warning, she vanished. No formal exit, no announcement, just silence. Teachers and peers were left puzzled. One former coordinator recalled, one day she was preparing for a lead solo, and the next she was gone. At the time, whispers floated around the local circuit. Maybe she had stage burnout, maybe she got sick, or maybe her family pulled her out for personal reasons. But years later, in a rare and vulnerable moment, Darci herself admitted the truth. She felt like she didn't belong. Despite the smiles and ribbons, she had been internally crumbling. The environment, though supportive, overwhelmed her. Rehearsals were long, expectations were high, and the pressure to constantly be on started to feel like a weight she couldn't carry. The joy of performing faded under the anxiety of perfection. And so, she stepped away, not with drama, but with quiet sadness. She didn't perform publicly for months. Her puppets gathered dust. Her voice fell silent. But something was stirring beneath the surface. That retreat wasn't a surrender, it was a reset. In those silent months, Darci wasn't giving up. She was recovering, processing, healing. Her family later revealed that it was during this time she began journaling, sketching puppet ideas, and rewatching old ventriloquist tapes, not for entertainment, but for clarity. Slowly, cautiously, she started performing again, first in front of her family, then at church, then back in local pageants with a different energy. She wasn't chasing applause anymore. She was reclaiming her love for the art. And just when it seemed like she had finally found her rhythm again, an unexpected call from a national TV show would yank her out of recovery and throw her into the biggest risk of her life. It's a part of her story that no audience ever saw, the moment everything she had worked for nearly vanished behind a locked bathroom door. Hours before her life would change forever, Darci Lynne Farmer was battling a storm no one could hear. On the surface, everything was in place. The puppet was ready, the song rehearsed, the cameras rolling. But behind the scenes at America's Got Talent, Darci was unraveling. According to sources close to the family, she had barely slept the night before her audition. Her appetite was gone. Her hands trembled as she adjusted Petunia's bow. And then, just before her name was called, she disappeared. What followed was 20 minutes of panic backstage as producers searched for the young girl expected to perform next. They eventually found her locked in a restroom stall, breathing heavily, whispering to herself. It wasn't just nerves, it was a full-blown silent panic attack. Her brother rushed in, gently coaching her through breathing exercises they had practiced at home for moments just like this. Her mother waited outside, resisting the urge to intervene, fearing that too much pressure would break her completely. Even Simon Cowell, backstage reviewing notes, reportedly asked, "Is she all right?" when delays extended longer than expected. And then, somehow, Darci emerged. Pale, shaking, but upright. She didn't say much. She didn't need to. She looked at her mom, clutched Petunia, and nodded. That quiet moment, unseen, unrecorded, was the true performance. Because what happened next was nothing short of electric. The lights hit, the crowd went silent, and a puppet rabbit began to sing Summertime in a voice that felt impossible. The judges' jaws dropped. The internet exploded. But none of them knew how close they had come to missing it entirely. One wrong word, one extra second of hesitation, and that audition might have never happened. Darci wasn't just performing for America. She was surviving herself. That moment on stage became an explosion of everything she'd been holding back for years. And while the world saw a confident prodigy in command of her craft, her family saw something far more fragile. A miracle born not of fearlessness, but of facing fear head on. But as her audition went viral and applause erupted across the globe, another question quietly lingered behind her perfect smile. Could she truly handle the fame that was about to hit? In the days following her jaw-dropping AGT audition, Darci Lynne became an overnight sensation. But behind the viral clips and golden buzzer confetti, a new kind of pressure began to form, and not all of it was friendly. Talent scouts marveled at her poise, fans praised her fearless performance, and media outlets labeled her a prodigy. But those who had been in the room, and those who knew her best, saw a different story unfold off camera. Whispers began to swirl that producers had gone above and beyond to accommodate Darci's emotional fragility before the taping. While most contestants were expected to fend for themselves backstage, sources claimed Darci had extra support. Private quiet rooms, one-on-one handling, even wellness check-ins. Some skeptics in the entertainment world accused the show of babying her, speculating that AGT had bent the rules to ensure a clean take. But these weren't diva demands, they were survival mechanisms. She was brilliant, said one crew member anonymously, but you could see the fear in her eyes right up until the first note. Others questioned whether a child that emotionally raw should have been thrust into such a high-pressure spotlight. The debate sparked quietly across entertainment blogs and parent forums. Was Darci a gifted performer or a fragile child being paraded too early? Darci herself never commented directly on the rumors, but in subtle interviews later that year, she hinted at the emotional cost. "I'm really thankful for the support," she said in one segment, "because there were definitely moments I didn't think I could do it." Her mother, Misty, revealed in a later podcast that they had considered pulling out even after the audition aired, fearing the sudden wave of media exposure might overwhelm Darci's already delicate balance. But Darci stayed in the competition, smiling, performing, shining, because deep down, she knew this was her moment. The fear never truly left. It walked beside her, even as she held a puppet in one hand and a $1 million dream in the other. Fame had arrived like a tidal wave, and she was still learning how to swim. What the world witnessed was a polished performance. But what they didn't see was the quiet storm she battled behind every laugh, every lyric, every judge's praise. And as the curtain began to rise on the rest of her AGT journey, one final question remained. Was this the beginning of her breakthrough, or the beginning of another breakdown? Looking back now, it's tempting to see Darci Lynne's rise as a fairy tale. An unassuming girl walks onto a stage, stuns the world, and walks off into stardom. But that version erases everything that truly mattered. Because Darci's real triumph wasn't the applause, or the trophies, or even the golden buzzer. It was the fact that she showed up at all. That a child crippled by anxiety, who once ran from every stage, who hid behind bathroom stalls and canceled auditions, chose, of her own will, to face a storm most adults couldn't weather. And she did it not to chase fame, but to reclaim something that had once been stolen from her. Her voice. Not the one that sang Summertime with pitch-perfect grace, but the inner voice that had long been silenced by fear, by pressure, by self-doubt. Every moment before AGT, every panic attack, every retreat from the spotlight, every uncertain breath backstage, it all built toward one extraordinary decision: to step forward when it would have been easier to disappear. That's the part the world didn't see. That's the story hidden behind the curtain. And even now, as Darci continues to evolve as an artist, advocate, and young woman navigating an industry notorious for breaking spirits, that same quiet bravery echoes in everything she does. Her early journey wasn't clean. It wasn't glamorous. It was messy, emotional, and fragile, but also powerful. Because before she ever held a puppet, before she ever made America laugh or cry, Darci Lynne proved something much greater. That courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it trembles. Sometimes it hides behind soft fur and a stitched-on smile. And sometimes it walks onto a stage terrified, but does it anyway. And that is what really happened before America's Got Talent. The rest is just the highlight reel.